What's your creepiest glitch in the Matrix that's ever happened to you? Story one, I remember being pretty young, like 9 or 10, and I was in the car park of a pub in England, South End. I remember seeing someone in their teens in the window of a house looking over the car park. They waved at me and I felt like I knew them. My parents asked who I was waving at, and I said, just some lady in the window over there. Didn't think much of it. Fast forward 10 years. I was at my nan's new house. I remember walking into her room, which I never was allowed to do, going to the window. I then realized I was in the house looking over that same parking lot and remembering that interaction years before. Then a girl around 9 or 10, who was in said car park, waved at me and I waved back. I felt like I knew her. Could not explain it and have never told anyone about it. It freaked me out. Story 2. When I was a teenager, my family lived in a big 115-year-old brick house. Plenty of creepy stuff happened, but one night I was heading to bed when the door between the first floor kitchen and the basement stairs absolutely slammed shut. It had a unique sound that I recognized immediately as the kitchen or basement door. There were no windows open that could have caused a draft. Our dog was asleep on the second floor. I was on the second floor. My parents were both asleep in the third floor attic. Had been converted to a master bedroom. None of us could have shut the door. Terrified, I worked up the courage to go investigate, carrying my hilariously teeny pocket for protection. As I went downstairs, I turned on every light. When I reached the kitchen, the door was wide open. Even more freaked out, I ran back up to bed, leaving the lights on. A minute or two later, I heard a definite shh. Okay, from downstairs. I laid in bed and I was ready to accept my demise. Eventually, I somehow fell asleep, and in the morning, I was there, first downstairs. I woke up before my parents and dog and found that the lights were all off and the basement door had been shut again. Story 3. Weird but happy. About 5 years ago in November, we lost our family dog to cancer. She was the dog my children grew up with, loved by all. At the next Christmas, at the end of the day of gifts, food, and family, as I was picking up, I found a tiny pewter dog figure sitting on the mantel. I asked everyone who had been at the house that day if they left it. No one had. Okay, weird, but took it as a good omen. When my eldest went back to college at the end of that Christmas break, he asked if he could take the little figurine to remember his dog. Of course, I said yes. A week or two later, picking up around the house, there was the figurine again. I called my son and said, "You forgot the dog figure." He said, "No, I didn't. It's right in front of me on my desk." I had now found a second figure. Again, no one claimed any knowledge of it. No idea how. But I still have the two of them tucked away on a shelf to this day. Story 4. I used to have a recurring dream as a teenager every night for months. I was sitting at a table on the patio of a restaurant. I was out there alone, waiting for my food. A homeless man comes up to the other side of the patio and asks for change. I'm digging in my wallet for a couple dollars, and then I hear tires screech and look up to see a crash in an intersection near the restaurant. I run out there to see if I can help, and as I run out into the road, I get hit by a car and wake up at the impact. After a while, the dream stopped and I put it out of my mind. Fast forward to me being 28 and sitting at an on the border on the patio waiting for my food. A homeless guy comes walking past the restaurant but doesn't stop and ask for change. It makes me think about that dream though, and I start to feel uneasy. Shortly after, I hear the tires screech and I see a wreck happen in the intersection near the restaurant. I begin to run out there, but stop at the sidewalk and look out towards oncoming traffic, and there is an SUV not slowing down. She was on her phone and blew through the intersection completely unaware of what had just happened. Ran out and checked on the people. Everyone was fine. Story 5. This happened around 1991. It's the middle of the night. I'm standing in my sister's living room, and it must be a full moon, because even though it's around 1 a.m. and the lights are off, I can see clearly. There's a mixing bowl with popcorn kernels in the bottom on the floor in front of the TV, and some rental VHS in a pile nearby. I hear a noise and turn around to see my sister's normally very friendly Labrador retriever looking like Cujo, fangs bared, snarling, hackles raised. Suddenly, there's a bright flash of light, and I wake up like I hit the bed from a great height. I think that was a weird dream. Eventually, I fall back to sleep, and in the morning, I call my sister, planning to tell her the story, but she preempts me by telling me about the weird thing that happened in the night. They woke up to the sound of the dog snarling at about 1 a.m. Her husband thought there was a prowler in the house, got a gun, and went to find the dog. She was standing in the living room, snarling in the middle of the room. He couldn't see anyone, so he flipped on the light. No one was there. The dog instantly stopped snarling and walked to her bed like nothing had happened. He checked the property and went back to bed. We talked a bit, and I found out they watched some rental movies, and of course we had popcorn. Why? My sister is a little woo-woo at times, so I decided not to tell her about my night. She lived about 450 miles away, by the way. Story 6. I wouldn't say that this was creepy, but it's definitely one of the most quaintly surreal things I've ever experienced. So back in 2016, I was injured at work, and for about 6 months, My life consisted of going to physical therapy and being confined to bed until I could walk. With that in mind, I had a lot of time to read books. One of the books that I was reading was Ex Heroes by Peter Klein. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but when I read a book, I like to cast the characters in my head, coming up with how they look. One of the minor characters in this book was named Ilya, and because I know someone named Ilya, and because the book is set in Los Angeles where I live, the Ilya in the book became the Ilya that I knew in my imagination. But then, something strange started to happen. The Ilya in the book made specific references to movies like Alien, a movie which the Ilya I know is a huge fan of. The Ilya in the book was a big fan of firearms, as the Ilya that I know is. Put into words, these details seem slim, but there was something so strange about the character in this book that I eventually reached out to the Ilya that I knew to ask about it. Turns out that Ilya knows the author, Peter Klein's, who had put him in the book. What are the odds that I would choose to buy a random book with a story that takes place essentially on my street in Los Angeles and features someone I know in real life as a minor character? That blew my mind, and it's easily one of the most surreal experiences. Story 7. Not my story, but my grandpa's. So he served in the Navy and hadn't come home for 5 years. He finally got to go home, and on his way, he saw his old friend, let's call him Wally. Wally was getting on his normal bus, and my grandpa shouted, "Hi!" to him, but Wally didn't respond. But he didn't think much of it, seeing how Wally didn't have the best hearing. Wally got on his bus and looked my grandpa in the eye as the bus drove away. Later, after he got home and was talking to his dad, he asked him how Wally was doing and told his dad about how he saw him earlier. His dad was silent for a minute and asked him if he was sure he saw Wally. My grandpa said yes, and his dad replied, "Wally died 6 months ago. Story 8, I died. I saw it. I lived it. Either it was another world, the version of me that died I saw, or I'm going crazy. I passed away." We had a pep rally in school, and after it was finished, we had to go back to class. Well, my friend and I were not into that, so we wanted to go across the street to Sonic. Across the school, there is not heavy traffic, but if you don't pay attention, you could get hit. Well, I remember walking with him, and he dropped something, so I went across the street first. I just saw a red Tahoe heading right for me, and I got hit. I remember everything. I remember gasping for air. I remember waking up and sleeping again. Then nothing. All of a sudden, I was back in the stadium again, and the exact same words came out of the principal's mouth. My friend wanted to go get Sonic, but I was freaking out. Was asking him everything. I thought it had to be a dream, so I went with him just to see what would happen. He dropped his stuff again, and I waited. To my horror, that same red Tahoe showed up. I told him that I'm going back to school, I ain't dying again. I can still see the other version of me on that street. It just messed up. Not even moving. Story 9. One day when I was about 8, I didn't go to school because I was sick. My friend was supposed to bring me homework, etc. But he never came. My granddad came home from work and he told me that that friend was dead. I was devastated. That night I had a dream. I was with my friend at a playground next to our school and we were talking, and then he told me that he was safe. It didn't hurt when that car hit him. The next day, my mother wanted to talk to me about that situation, and she asked me if I wanted to know what happened. I told her that I know everything my friend told me. She thought that my granddad told me, but he did not. He said that he did not want to tell me without her knowing it. That night, I had a dream again, and I was talking to him again. We were playing and having fun, and he told me that he really had to go, and we won't see each other ever again. The next day was his funeral, and I really haven't had a dream about him ever since. Story 10 might get buried, but oh well. When I played baseball as a kid, they were handing out the trophies at the end of the season. They called out the names of the kids while we received our trophies. They happened to be a kid with the same name as me. We met after the ceremony because it was weird since our last name isn't a very common one. We had the same birthday and everything. We looked alike. Both our dads were named Derek, and both of our sisters were named Lily. As a kid, I found it cool. As an adult, I find it cool and also disturbing. There's a podcast called Radiolab. They did an episode on coincidence that has a similar story about a girl in England that releases a balloon with her name and address on it. It floats some hundreds of miles and lands in a guy's yard whose neighbor is the same age with the same name and has a bunch of similarities. Story 11. This summer, I bought my girlfriend a last-minute birthday trip to go kayaking around the San Juan Islands off the Washington state coast. After a long drive and ferry trip, we found the tour group of about 20 people and were then shuffled into a shuttle van for a ride to the beach. Now, my girlfriend has a unique name similar to the name of a famous painter. Let's say it's Rebecca Warhol, just for fun. It's not. She's a little ray of sunshine and started chatting with the middle-aged woman sitting next to her on the shuttle as we waited to leave. The woman noted that she had always loved the name Rebecca, as it was her mother's name. They made pleasant small talk in the van until the tour guide passed around the sign-in sheet for all of us to fill out. That's when things got strange. My girlfriend wrote her full name on the sheet and passed it on to the woman, who immediately shouted, "Oh my God," and started crying. After a few minutes of total confusion, she told us Rebecca Warhol was my mother's full name, and these islands were her favorite place in the world. She passed away this summer from cancer, and we've traveled hundreds of miles to spread her ashes here. We were stunned. I literally picked a random date, time, and tour company, and then we were split into the same group as this woman, and my girlfriend was sitting right next to her on the shuttle. What the hell? She continued by saying, my daughter told us that Nana Rebecca would be with us on this trip, and I didn't believe it until now. It was the most unbelievable coincidence we had ever experienced. Totally convinced me that there's more to this world. As my brother later said, the universe winked at us. Story 12. About 2 years ago, I went to collect my husband from the ferry after work. My husband got into the car, and as I was driving very slowly out of the car park, we both noticed two people standing a few meters in front of our car. It looked as though they were strangers, older looking professionals, both walking to their separate cars in different areas of the car park. The man was reaching into his side bag, and the lady was further ahead than the man, with her head turned to the right. I know the exact positions they were in because they were completely frozen on the spot. My husband and I sat there watching the frozen strangers, not saying anything to each other, and then all of a sudden, it was like someone pressed play and the two strangers just continued on like nothing had happened. My husband and I promised to each other that we would never forget how weird the experience was. I can't remember exactly how long they stayed frozen like that, but it was long enough to freak us both out. Story 13, 1985. My ex-wife and I were sleeping. There was a small sliver of light coming in through the window from a streetlight, so the room and bed were dimly visible. Our black Pomeranian was at the end of the bed asleep. I dreamt that I woke up, reached down to pet him, and he turned into a glossy black bivalve or oyster, which opened up to reveal rows of gleaming glass teeth. I woke up to my ex backpedaling up the bed over the pillows towards the wall. I asked, "What's wrong?" She said, "What is that shiny black clam thing with the teeth at the end of the bed? Where's the dog?" We had had the same nightmare at the same time. This still gives me a chill. Story 14. Every night I go to bed about 2 hours before my husband. I always wake up when he comes into the room. One night he was gaming with a friend, and hours later I heard him sneak into the room and crawl across the floor so he'd pop up and scare me. I felt the floor kind of shake and felt him bump clumsily against the side of the bed in the dark. I held out my hand and asked him not to scare me, and I was already scared enough and begged him to just take my hand and come to bed. I couldn't see anything in the room, but knew he was there and just waited for him to jump up so I could move on and go back to sleep. That's when I heard him talking to his friend in the other room. I was frozen. I know there's sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming or something that explains this, but I would have sworn on my son's life that someone had crawled across the floor and jostled the bed. Eventually, I worked out of the fear enough to grab my phone and text my husband to come in and turn on the lights and check under the bed. But holy crap, it boggles me how real it felt. Story 15. A friend and I went to a buddy's house for a birthday party. Stayed up playing Halo 2 and hanging out. We all crashed in the basement. Robert, friend who came with me, and I got up at the same time. Not like one after each other. We both got up at the same time after being asleep for a few hours and rushed to the bathroom. Robert was more athletic than probably still is and beat me there. I ran upstairs, barely getting my head over the toilet before puking my guts out. Robert was doing the same thing in the basement. I was wearing a wooden cross my grandmother mailed me from Romania. I'm not religious, but I appreciated the gift as I had never met her at that point. Cross somehow became detached from the cord, fell on the tile, and broke into two pieces. So we both call our respective mothers and get picked up. By now it's like 3 to 4 a.m. Felt sick until we left the house. Once I was in the car and a few blocks away, felt perfectly. Robert reported the same thing to me that day over MSN Messenger. Felt perfectly fine after a few blocks. Got the pictures developed a few weeks later. There's a picture of us on the couch rocking some Halo, and the whole room looks like it's filled with mist. Super spooky. I've been looking for the pic for a long time, and I can't seem to find it anywhere. But every few years, my sister and I search my mom's photo album. Story 16. Two things. Each was witnessed by at least one other person, and both were while driving. Once at a stop sign in a neighborhood. All of these little sparkles started swirling around in midair, roughly 3 to 4 feet off the ground out of nowhere. The group of them were roughly 2 feet wide by 3 to 4 feet tall. It lasted 3 to 5 seconds, and then they were gone. No one was around, and when I asked my passenger if he saw it too, he breathed a sigh of relief and said yes. We spoke about it a little more, but there's no reasonable explanation. The second happened when myself and 3 friends were driving down an empty country road. Very straight stretch. A man on a bike appeared. Someone said to watch out for him, so as not to hit him, and then he disappeared. Our minds were blown to say the least. Just poof, and he's gone. Story 17. Once when we were kids, I had some friends with an Ouija board in the basement of the building where I lived. Through the stairs, there was an elevator shaft that had these wide bars where you could stick your arm in them. Typical old elevator design. So one night, they decided to go to the basement to do another Ouija session, and I decided to drop a cup of glass through the shaft, just to scare them off. I let go of the cup, saw it vanish into the darkness, and I never heard the cup hit the ground. I stood there confused. Next day, I went downstairs to the basement with one of my friends, and the cup was there, placed in the middle of the elevator shaft floor. The cup was upright and intact. I was seriously freaked out by it because it would be impossible for someone to enter the elevator shaft and place the cup there like the cup should have broken into pieces since I threw it from the 10th floor against a cement floor. Story 18. After my little brother was murdered the next morning, I was talking with a friend, and he mentioned this other dude I went to high school with, whose younger brother had died in a car accident a couple weeks before. Later that day, I pulled out a slip of paper with this other dude's number and name on it from my pants. I vaguely remember running into him a year or so before this, at a club where he gave me his number. I swear I'd worn and washed these jeans at least a dozen times since I had run into this dude. It still makes no sense how that paper was there, and then I only found it then. I called the dude and we talked a bunch. It really helped me deal with the situation. Story 19, I had just pulled into the parking lot of where I worked and was walking towards the building. It was like 3 in the afternoon, broad daylight. All of a sudden, I heard an ambulance's siren start sounding. Naturally, I looked down the road to try and see the ambulance. I saw it approaching and decided to watch it for. It was quickly getting closer, and it was about to pass right by me. However, there was a large SUV waiting to turn out of the parking lot and onto the road, blocking a few meters of the road from my view. The ambulance passed behind the SUV, probably about 50 feet away from me at most, and I vividly remember the siren becoming completely silent in that instant. The ambulance had vanished entirely as it passed behind that SUV. I was so confused. The road did not have many cars on it at the time, and it was broad daylight. I did a triple take and made sure that I didn't just miss it. I had a clear view of the road going both directions, and there was no more ambulance, no more sirens either. I walked up and down the road trying to find it for a solid minute, but nope, it was gone. I was well rested, not on drugs, and I didn't have a history of hallucinations. It seems dismissible, but I was completely aware of what happened, and I can't explain it to this day. Story 20. I should have fallen into the River Thames once. Me and some friends from uni were exploring London and taking pictures beside the Thames when I decided posing next to the wall was a weak photo. So I decided to climb up for better photo opportunity. As I hoisted myself up, I must have used far too much power and knew fully I was about to go straight over and into the river, which was like a 20-feet drop. I managed to get one foot onto the wall and felt something completely stop my momentum. Almost felt like divine intervention in a way. I stood up straight, alive and still on dry land. As I turned to express how close I was to dying there, and then someone took a photo of me, which is still one of the best photos I've taken of me to date. Story 21. I've told this story before and could go into a ton of detail, but here's the short version. I am 100% sure I vividly remember a dog that apparently doesn't exist. When I was 16, we lived on the other side of the province, and my uncle had this little Jack Russell named Crew. Crew went missing for several months and then turned up at a humane society over an hour away, and we were all shocked. This little dog has made it so far. Anyway, that was almost 20 years ago, and the other day I was talking to my parents and was like, whenever I hear about Jack Russells, I think about Crew and that stunt he pulled, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Insisted my uncle had never had such a dog. I must have dreamed it, etc. Honestly, anyone else who would have remembered this dog has been dead for a long time, and I don't even have any pictures of my uncle. I have absolutely no way to prove this dog existed, but I'm sure that he did. Story 22. Taking the trash out at night, super remote area, so I know for a fact we're the only ones around here. Getting close to the road, and I hear very clearly, "Help me," from a female voice. Even knowing there's such a slim chance of there being another living person around, I still feel like I should look around and check it out in case I wasn't just hearing things and someone actually needs help. Take about 2 steps in the direction I thought I heard it, hear a giggle in the same exact voice, turn around and walk promptly back up the driveway because of that crap. Anyone who actually needed help wouldn't be laughing. Story 23. I was working on my motorcycle in a dirt lot where I had crashed it trying to do a sick drift, breaking off the clutch lever and the gear shifter. I had brought a wrench set with me, and I was using one of them to take off a bolt when I put it down on the ground to finish unscrewing the bolt with my hand. 2 minutes later, I went to pick it back up and it was gone. I ran all around this dirt lot looking for it to no avail. Luckily, I had a spare in the car. Fixed the bike and drove back to my apartment to shower as I was filthy. I walked in my room and sitting on my desk was the wrench. I was dumbfounded. Story 24. So, this might be hard to explain. I was probably 12 and lived in a big log cabin. One day while my parents were at work, I got in a fight with my brother, 18, who had some anger issues. He chased me through the house, and I ran out one door, around our porch, and in through another door. I was going to lock it behind me, but didn't have time because he was too close behind me. So I slammed the door behind me and kept running. When I glanced back to see if he had made it through the door yet, he was banging on the window of the said door and yelling for me to unlock it. The door was locked, and there was no He had locked it because the door could only be locked from the outside with a key, of course, and our parents never gave us keys. There was also no way the door could have accidentally locked when I slammed it behind me, because it needed to be fully turned to lock and usually required some finagling at the end to make it actually lock. I stood there dumbfounded and then ran to a bathroom and locked myself in there. Definitely feel that saved me that day.